Hello and welcome to the Seren Stay-at-Home Series archive. In this video, we welcome award-winning author and playwright Jaki McCarrick for a special Q&A session. We hope you enjoy watching it back. So I suppose my first question for all of you is, does anyone have a question?
I've got a question.
Okay, let's open with Isabel's question.
Well, I might know some of the answer already, but I'm always fascinated by different writers' process. You know, and when I think about your work, Jaki, I think about the detail and how you get to make very small details mean so much. So I wonder about how you get to that, say, how you start off and how you get to this sort of finished product where every small thing has such significance, but it's very subtle and amazing.
Right. I think, well, I mean, you know, detail brings something alive, as you know. I think it's very important for your own sense of confidence and belief in what you're doing. I think for the creative process, when you're trying to convince yourself that you are in this world with these people, and I suppose this is the same for all forms, be it plays, fiction, poetry, you're in this universe with these people doing these things. Exact detail helps convince you that you're there. So once that happens, you know, how can I put it? You've convinced yourself. You're very, very likely to convince the reader. You're very, very likely to you're going to be creating truthful, believable characters, motives, psychologies, emotions, all the rest of it. And I think detail really, really helps you find that. It grounds you as well. I you know, try and steer away from the general as much as possible. I want to know the detail. Maybe that's a little bit of a journalistic background as well, because the first writing I did was music journalism. So yeah, I do chase down the detail, and then once you have the detail, if you want to fly a little bit, you can, because you've got the detail. That's how I can't see Isabel now, so I hope you're hearing this, Isabel. That's my argument about that. I need to know it. I need to convince myself, and I need to convince myself of the universe that I'm creating, and I'll go out of my way to research it and check it as well. For Belfast Girls, I did a lot of research, but I mean, you know, I did for most of the plays, and I do it for stories as well. I hate doing it sometimes because there's a lot of legwork, but I do it. Does that answer your question, Isabel?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And also details are great. I think I'm a bit of a nerd for that as well. I often find the detail and the chasing down of detail and the research, if you are having real creative trouble and you can't put anything creative down on paper, you know, you just can't. You can just go and do some research and reading and get some details, and you will be very surprised how it all starts to fall into place in your mind, you know, in the back of your mind. It's quite an amazing thing, actually, how that works. I seem to be quite good at sensing what place I'm in. If I'm not in a particularly creative place, okay, I'll do some reading, I'll check that, and then I'll get the idea that I was looking for, because I'm in the concrete world, if you see what I mean, and I'm still writing when I'm in that concrete world, and so there's a door then into the, you know, the more creative world. I know I'm starting to ramble now, but I think it's a good place to go to as well, the detail, if you are stuck in any way the rest of what you're doing. I think it's very important, actually. Yes.
Great, thanks. Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I'll move on to some of mine. Claire.
I have a question.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, Jackie. My question is about your characters, and I suppose where the detail comes from. And I ask because I have been writing like creative nonfiction,
Right.
relatively new to writing, dipping my toe into it. And I'm trying to write fiction now. But I don't know if I'm trying to write fiction because I want to protect the people I'm writing about, so I don't want to admit that it's actually nonfiction.
Yeah.
Or if I'm just taking a sort of a reasonable amount of inspiration from the people around me and the people in my life and putting it into a fictional character. So that's my question is around how do you draw the line between what's fiction and nonfiction if your characters are inspired by human beings and human interactions that you have in your life?
Well, I think there's a lot of this depends on what kind of writer you are as well, and what sort of your baseline, where you begin, is. And I have a thing, and lots of people have said it to me about my writing, but it's true, and it's where I'm coming from. I sort of do need some kind of foot in my real life, and whether these are stories that my dad has told me, or have been in my personal life, or my sisters have told me, or I've heard from somebody. And I've been especially early on, I've been very guilty of using even real names. So I'm changing that. Don't do that. But it's totally understandable to do that, because say that character, I don't know, Joe down the road, who is very interesting to you, and you knew a lot about him. Why wouldn't you be interested in his stories, and if it means something to you or it connects to you in some way? So I do draw a lot on my own life, and I even feel even more so than that. I think there's a few touchstones there. I feel if I sort of go to this story or this particular person, that I really trust them, I know them, and they're going to bring something to me and to the story. I actually do think that. So I do go there a lot, and I've done the opposite actually. I've quite recently written a very long non-fiction essay, and that was very, very hard to do, and it's going to be published soon. And when I was writing it, I thought, I'm going straight back to fiction, because this is too bearing of the soul completely. I can't hide anything here. So yes, for me there is a connection between both of them as well, but at the same time I can feel like I've just written a short story called Driving Lauren Bacall, and it is loosely based on a story my father told me about some man that he knew. But by the time I finished it, it has nothing to do with that original story. So it was a starting point. It gave me some detail, some reality, some kind of faith that I had in with the material, and then I just ran somewhere else with it. So they're great starting points to get you going, so you believe what you're doing as well. You're just not writing in a vacuum kind of thing, that you can invest it with emotion, and a sense of truth, I suppose. And then later on, lots of other things came into play. Like sometimes it's true. Sometimes true stories are less believable than your fictional stories. It's, you've heard this before, and it can be quite true. So you often have to go to something you've based on reality and tone it down a little bit, because nobody would believe it. Those things happen as well. But yeah, for me, I mix it up a lot. I do. So but just try not use real names. because you'll get into trouble. Not good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure not to do that.
Just change the name, gender, even change the gender. No one can accuse you of anything. You didn't, you know, you didn't expose that person in print, kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm gonna. That kind of leads on in some ways to one of my questions.
Okay.
Which is to do with where you look for inspiration and how you go about crafting a story or play from an initial idea that comes to you. I mean, quite a lot of your writing has links to Ireland. What is it about Ireland, or specifically, that you find so much to draw from?
Well, that's just to do with my background, Sarah. I was born and brought up in London, moved to Ireland when I was 12. I see myself, it's very mixed up. I see myself really, and this is the non-fiction essay that I've just written about. It was based on a lecture, actually, I gave at the London Irish Centre in London in November. I sort of see myself, because of how formed the age I was when I came over to Ireland, I sort of see myself as London Irish. I do feel myself second generation, because then I went back to London when I was 19, literally 7 years later. And then I came back again to Ireland. So I feel I have the slight outsider's view of Ireland. And where we came back to was the border area as well, which is, a very interesting area. So I'm not embedded. I'm not really, I don't feel, and even now that I've moved back, and I'm back here 13 years since I moved back from London, I don't feel totally embedded in Ireland. So maybe that's a good thing. I had a creative writing tutor when I was at Trinity called Anne Devlin, is a brilliant playwright. And she actually said that's a very useful quality, a useful thing, just to be able to always look, from the outside. So I do think it's useful. But every now and then I have a London story to write, or, there's a story in the Scattering that I set in Florida, because I was there for 2 weeks once, and, there was a character there that inspired me so much. I thought I have to write something about that. So I don't just believe about writing what you know and where you're from. It's occasionally I like to completely go against that. Like, there's another story in the Scattering called The Tribe, just to do something different. But yeah, Ireland. And I also feel if you have multiple interests like that, I'm Irish. I'm also second generation Irish. Sometimes I like science fiction. Sometimes I like the Gothic. I don't think you have to narrow yourself down. I don't, if you're interested in these different genres, or, different, if it's not a different genre, different aspects of your own experience, you're perfectly within your rights to explore them. That's what I think. So, yeah, so that's the Ireland thing, is my background, really, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for another one from me.
Yes.
So obviously we know, for us, you've written the short story collection, The Scattering. We were very fortunate to publish that.
Thank you.
But we also know that you are a very successful playwright. So do you ever find there's any crossover between your stories and your plays? Does one form sometimes lead into another, or are they quite separate creative processes?
Both things. For instance, the jailbird, that's in, lots of people like that story in The Scattering. That is originally a play. That was originally a play that nobody wanted to stage, nobody wanted to publish. And I absolutely loved the characters of Connie and her son, Michael. And I thought, I'm not abandoning these two characters. So I thought, I'm going to take this material and try. It was the first time I'd ever tried to do this, and try and work it into a short story. well, it was like tearing my hair out. I literally couldn't do it, but at least I had the core characters and a lot of the dialogue, some dialogue, because some stage dialogue won't work in fiction, but I had a core of it. So yeah, in that example, there's crossover. In other ways, fiction, that you drama is, there's no point for you to stand back and comment because the characters are doing all the talking, so you can't really do that. But you can do that in fiction, which is delightful about fiction. And also, you can, I was quite poetic in that story in The Jailbird, which was lovely for me. So I also write poetry, but in the drama I couldn't be, because these characters are very, very raw to each other, so I suppose the poetry comes out in a different way in drama. It's maybe more structural. Yeah, so there is crossover. I find, for instance, in the novel that I'm writing, there's little sections now that I've had to rework, because it's taken a long time to get this thing right, and I'm in great big passages of dialogue now. I find that so easy, and that is definitely because of drama writing. So that's good, but they're not always the same kind of dialogue. They're not. And I've had to, if I've ever used any, if I've ever taken anything from a play, I've had to change it because the tone is things, it just doesn't sound right. I have to do something to it. Yeah, so there is a little bit of crossover, and drama writing and being good at dialogue especially is very useful for fiction writing. And sometimes if you've an idea, sometimes if I have an idea, I do sort of say to myself, well, is this a play, or is this a story, or is this something else? What is this? Or is it a poem? What is this? And so sometimes you have to make that decision. There is something going, which I've completely forgotten what it is, but there is an idea going around in my head that I've been thinking about, which form is that going to be? So yes, and I'm sure people have made the wrong choices sometimes. You do something and it should have been something else. Yeah. Just to summarize, there is crossover. There definitely is crossover, but obviously, from a completely practical point of view, there's no prose in plays, so it's not there. Yeah, but it can't hurt. I mean, lots of writers. Emma Donoghue, who wrote Room, wrote loads of plays before she wrote fiction. So, there's lots of crossover. Edna O'Brien as well has written plays. There's crossover as well. And I'm sure people who are very good at dialogue, who've never written a play, who, write prose, tried their hands at plays, and I'm sure they're great, so yeah. Colin Tabine, same. He does both.
Great, thank you.
Chekhov, of course. Chekhov did both.
Are there any more audience questions? No? Amy, did you have any questions?
Sarah or Tracy?
Put you on the spot.
What are you working on now?
Oh, I am working, remember I told you I was working on this novel about 7 years ago?
Yeah.
And that it was multi-narrative, set on the border, covering 300 years, a Huguenot family that moves to the border, and I'm looking at, these all interconnected family connections over about 300 years, and specifically the border. Anyway, I started off with a small idea, and in 2013 I was at the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris. I was the writer in residence there, and I was stuck in my room, probably like locked down or something, trying to hammer this thing out, which was silly because you just can't rush a novel. But anyway, I got a massive big piece of paper, and I joined 3 story ideas, separate stories ideas that I had, and I said, I'm going to weave all of these together. which is what that idea was, even though I had started with a very simple story of people on the border. And I have spent about 3 years being stuck with that ambition. So I created that version, that very long version. I sent it to my agent literally about 2 years ago, and he didn't like it. But he saw the ambition, he loved the ambition of it. I loved the ambition of it. But his comments were fantastic. He was right. There wasn't enough drive in it. So I put it away. I didn't know where it was going. Then the past year, I decided I'm just going to simplify this. So I took away everything that was making no sense. And what I have is the very first idea, but with traces of all the other things that it went through. So sometimes that happens. So now it's much simpler. And it's really it's still a bunch of people, but it's within one time frame on the border. And it's set around, and it's sort of looking at what this particular area does through, troubles, etc. There's an event that happens in the late 80s, what it does to a lot of those people and how it damages them. And people that we knew, Sarah, in the 80s in Dundalk, who then went away. And there was a lot of damaged people in there. So it's looking at a lot of those lives as well. And then I bring it up to date. And that's it. It's a simple story. It's
Right.
sort of ensemble. But it starts off with a girl coming back, because I had the London Irish thing, coming back to this area. So a lot of this is through her eyes. And it's called The Bright, Bright World. And that's a line from a W.S. Graham poem. And I just love it. So we'll see what happens. But nearly there.
Good.
Yeah.
Look forward to reading it.
Yeah, hope it works. That's what I just want it to work. I don't, after that, working will do me. A working book that works will do me fine. Yeah.
Before we let the other people in, you were saying how you've found your productivity kind of influenced by lockdown and everything. I mean, do you think you have been more productive during this time? Do you think it's helped? Or because creatives seem to say different things. Some people said they're really not feeling productive at the moment, and others are. How are you finding it?
Well, I wasn't happy about the whole thing at all. And as I said to you earlier on, Sarah, I was obsessed with the deaths and the things that were happening, and I was just going crazy on Twitter, sort of giving out about various governments, mostly the UK government. But I had to back off there because the truth is that we are home, we are stuck. So I just had a bit of a shift, and I thought, I've got to use this time. This is what's happening, and to be quite honest, with my novel, what took me away in the middle, literally 2015 to maybe 2018, was Belfast Girls, because Belfast Girls was touring a lot of countries. So I really didn't have the time to do the wrestling that I needed to do with it. I had the time to write it, I'm sure, but not wrestle, and I needed to wrestle with it. So that's what I've done. Yeah, I've had the time to wrestle, and it has been productive. So, you think about, I was thinking about, people who wrote novels a couple of hundred years ago. They would have had at least more headspace, time to wrestle with the thing that they're doing. It's not just writing time that you need. There's other, you really need to go in very deep. So I've been able to do that, thank God. What has helped is a little, doing up a little writing shed that I've got in the garden, which has been brilliant. Because it just means I've been able to go in there, and I haven't really done it up. I just took the paint tins out, stuck a chair in there. But it has really helped focus. So that's helped. Yes, so I have been productive. There's no two ways about it. I have. Yeah.
Amy, I can see you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. You said an interesting thing about flying with the detail, which I really liked. But I always want to ask, people who write fiction, do your characters tend to sort of take on a life of their own and sort of run off and do things that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to do? And do you let that happen, or do you try to rein them in somehow? Or
rein them in? No, absolutely, Amy. Because I remember when I was researching for, I mean, research is so important, and reading to me is really important before I begin something. I actually feel very unrooted and then get unconfident if I don't do my research, so I have to do it. But for instance, in Belfast Girls, when I was looking at the registry of the girls who were on those ships that went out to Australia from Ireland, because that's what that play is about. It's about 4,000 young women who were shipped off to Australia during the Irish famine. So I found registries of these girls on the ships, and on one of the registries was a girl called, I don't think it was the same name, I think I chose a different name. I think her name was Sarah something, born in Kingston, Jamaica. And I thought, well, all these other girls are born, Sligo or Belfast. How is she born in Kingston, Jamaica, and she goes on a ship from Belfast to Australia? So that, I said, well, I'm grabbing that detail, and that detail gave me Judith Noon, who is a mixed race girl who's been in Belfast. Probably she was adopted by people who farmed oysters in Larne. I gave her a whole backstory, but I found that information, and I could not use it, because then you can sort of loosely mention, which I in the end didn't mention, but you can mention the fact that there was a route from Belfast to the East Indies, which there was, rubber and tobacco and slaves and all that kind of thing. So that was a very useful piece of information. Also in Belfast, and of course I ran with that, and then I got this wonderful character. I love Judith. She's so strong in the play. She's a brilliant character, I think. And then I got other information about one of the girls, because she was supposed to have had a liaison with one of the sailors on that ship, is hoisted up a mast. Now, I didn't have the relationship with the sailor, but I had being hoisted up a mast for some other reason in the play. So I found these details, and they were just wonderful. I'm going to use them, and I don't know, I think they give a sense of veracity and believability to what you're doing, and I latch onto them. I think I have good instincts for those type of things. As soon as I find them, I just know that they're going to be useful. And yeah, mostly the characters do then take off, and I generally don't rein them in until late drafts, and then I cut back when they've had a good go at it by then, I suppose. So that's what I do.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'm just going to round off with one more question. I think we've got time for one more, which does kind of focus back on your plays. I mean, what first got you into playwriting? I think that in its simplest form.
First got me into playwriting. I think this is a simple question, but it's actually massive, really. I was originally writing at school. I was always writing. I was writing short stories and poetry from the off, but I didn't know what career you have with creative writing afterwards. So I went on a music journalism route. That's the sort of route that I went. And then later, I got very into, and I wrote short stories as well. And I won a few short story competitions locally. And then later, I got crazy into contemporary dance, and I studied contemporary dance. But the reason I was a good choreographer, was I always used text. That's what I think. I always combined text, and I'd get good marks. And at college, I would mix it up. And then when I graduated from Middlesex University, I went there in my mid-20s after working as a music journalist. I started to devise my own work. And then people said, well, do you want to direct this? Well, why don't you direct and write it? So suddenly, I always feel I did a full circle. I was writing again. So having gone journalism, dance, directing, writing. So that's sort of how that happened. But I do always keep in mind with the plays, lots of things that I learned when I did my dance degree. Like, I use levels. I think about levels a lot. I think about lots of, I like to, how can I put it, maybe uses of foreign language. Sometimes Sarah Kane, the playwright, always used to use foreign languages in her plays. Just things that keep what you're doing from going in such a trajectory, it suddenly dies a death. So you need to jumpstart things all the time, and use of levels, movement, messing around with language, these all help that. So, so I took away a lot of things from that background for my writing, I think. And hence my use of the mast in Belfast Girls. So I'm very aware that was a high level, so when that was being performed, you were going to be using a very high part of the stage. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. I would like to just round off then, I think, by saying thank you very much to you all for coming and joining us this evening. Thank you to Jaki for her insight that she's given us. I hope that you found it useful.